Thank you for that. Gabby, if you could go ahead and go to the next slide for us. All right, well, welcome everyone to this TECHXEJ event. Tonight we'll be delving into into inequalities in sustainable technologies. This event is being hosted by the Student Environmental Resource Center with sponsorship from the Bridges Multicultural Resource Center for retention and recruitment. So thank you very much to them. My name's Ashley. I'm Serc's Renewable Energy Education Associate, and I'll be one of the facilitators tonight. I'd like to have Meg and then Gabby go ahead and introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Meg. I am a first year studying environmental science, and I'm excited to be part of this discussion and event tonight.
Hi everybody, my name is Gabby Mbayek. I'm the current Environmental Justice Associate at Serc, and I'm one of the co-collaborators in planning this event. I will be tech support, so if you have any questions regarding that, feel free to private message me in the chat.
I've just launched a short poll. If you could take a couple of seconds to fill it out, it'll be open while we do our introduction. Like Gabby said, we do have some awesome tech support tonight. So if you do have any questions, please go ahead and use Zoom's raised hand button, or you can go ahead and message in the chat or message Gabby in the chat privately. With that, we'll go ahead and start off first with Gabby and a land acknowledgement.
Yeah, so while people are filling out the poll, or as people are finishing up on the poll, we would like to start our event, as we do with all of our events at Serc, with a quick land acknowledgement. Sorry, I have to shift some things around my screen for this. Oh dear. Okay, let's go back. Okay, amazing. All right, so this land acknowledgement was created by the Native American Student Development Center in collaboration with the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, and reads as follows. So we at the Student Environmental Resource Center recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the TECHXEJ-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold the University of California, Berkeley more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples.
Thank you so much for that land acknowledgement, Gabby, and thank you everyone for taking the moment to reflect upon that. We'll now go ahead and Gabby will cover some of our objectives for today.
Yeah, so this is a community event so that way we can create conversation and discourse about the role of technology and sustainability and environmental justice. So for our community objectives, we really would like this to be a reflective event for y'all. In terms of subject, Ashley and Meg will be highlighting inequities in access to sustainable technology, and we'll engage y'all in some really riveting discussion around key issues and potential solutions for the future. I'd like to reiterate also that this is a safe community space to really reflect and develop on ideas and perspectives.
With that, let's go ahead and have a look at our agenda for tonight. Okay, so with the goals that Gabby mentioned in mind, today Meg and I will be going through a brief presentation about 20 minutes on the role of technology in sustainability, as well as the unequal access to that technology. We'll then be making space for 2 discussions focused on reflections and solutions, about 10 minutes each in breakout rooms. With that, right before we get started on the presentation, if Gabby, you could move to the next slide. All the facilitators would like to acknowledge that the issues that we're highlighting tonight a part of a systemic issue. And we really want to acknowledge that because this isn't necessarily a result of the actions of individuals and does not mean to place any obligations on personal responsibilities. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Meg to start us off on our presentation.
Hi, so before we start, I think we were going to do a Mentimeter about just what we associate sustainability with. So I believe the link should be in the chat sometime soon. Or yeah, you can just go to menti.com and use that code. So just feel free to write anything and everything you associate sustainability with. So maybe like why engage in it, what it means to you. And we should see it start to populate as y'all enter what you associate with sustainability. And there's no like right or wrong answers. Obviously, we all have our own conceptions of what sustainability means to us. So yeah, take a minute or two to just see. Okay, so like justice, environmental, green, people. Oh, also this is the poll. Future, planet, durability, definitely inclusive, care, conscious, renewable energy, climate change. Ooh, lots of renewable energy. Okay, green. It's moving so quickly. Yeah, so there's a lot of human centered. That's really interesting. Yeah. So all of these phrases are definitely like aspects of sustainability, especially like long-term durability and justice. Renewable energy, glad we're all at this event because that's what we're really talking about with technology and sustainability today. But yeah, I'm glad to see that that's what you all associate sustainability with, decapitalization. Yeah. So if we want to move back to the slides. So along with all of those phrases and goals that we associate sustainability with, we also like to keep in mind the reasons that we have for engaging in sustainable practices, because these reasons are also usually benefits that arise from living sustainably. So one of them is definitely ownership of actions and their consequences. So for example, like when we make the switch from like plastic to reusable straws, it's generally because we recognize that plastic doesn't necessarily go anywhere once we dispose of it. It takes hundreds of years to degrade, and it's also like the production of plastic is also impactful on the environment and has consequences. So by making the more sustainable choice to like more reusable options, we're taking ownership of our actions and recognizing that the production and the waste of these products have consequences on the environment. And then another reason for sustainability is having an active role in determining our future, because we know that like the way we live now will impact like our family and future generations, but also like our community and the world as a whole. Another reason for sustainability is improved environmental quality, especially because of reduced pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions. For example, from cars, if you use electric vehicles or if you opt for public transportation more. And this means that there's better air quality for our communities. And this also means that there's like less risk of aggravating respiratory diseases and just overall increases the standard of living in our communities. And finally, another reason for sustainability is participating in a movement that we're all passionate about, and you're able to live by your values in doing so. So if you value like caring for the environment and having a more sustainable world that's more durable, like we said earlier, participating in a movement that you're passionate about, like sustainability, allows you to live by your values. And also, like whenever we're going throughout this presentation, if you have more thoughts about reasons to live to like switch over to more sustainable lifestyle practices, definitely put them in the chat. So if we want to go to the next slide. So yeah, some examples of like personal actions that we can take to be more sustainable are things like reducing your shower time or taking colder showers to conserve water or and energy, switching to using reusable cups, bags, straws, utensils instead of disposable ones, opting to bike or walk or use public transportation when possible instead of like our own individual cars, composting and recycling to reduce waste, and also mending clothes or shopping secondhand when possible instead of just buying new clothes whenever we want new items. And all of these actions can very easily be part of our everyday lives and our lifestyles. And it's really important to be able to engage in these actions. But like we mentioned earlier with our acknowledgement that a lot of these issues that we're talking about today have to do with a larger scale problem and not just something that we can solve individually. It's important to realize that like sustainability can be hard, and it's definitely can feel like our individual actions don't have much of an impact sometimes, especially in a society that's unsustainable. So like if I decide to walk to my destination instead of driving, but like everyone else in the city is driving, sometimes it just doesn't really feel like I'm doing much. But that's definitely not true. And every individual action is beneficial to the sustainability movement. But it's also important to note that sustainability isn't always an option for everyone. And this is due to larger forces with really complex historical backgrounds like colonialism and white supremacy and capitalism. And in order to have real change in sustainability on a larger scale, like within industries like the tech and fossil fuel industries, it's important for people working in these industries to recognize the roles that factors like capitalism and white supremacy and structural racism play in making sustainability difficult for communities that are lower income or communities of color. So for example, we'll talk about this, I know we'll go into this more later, but like electric vehicles are supposed to be a more sustainable option, but generally they're too expensive and they're not accessible to lower income communities because of forces like capitalism and structural racism. So ultimately, while taking individual sustainable actions is really important, it's also just as important to recognize that it's not always an option for everyone. And we want to make sure that like what we're doing is also helping others who don't have don't have as many sustainable options gain access to these options and more sustainable lives. If we want to go to the next slide, I think we're going to hand it over back to Ashley to talk about technology's role in sustainability.
Thanks, Meg, for starting us off. So yeah, I'd really like to now sort of switch over to the role that technology has in bringing sustainability into our everyday lives. Technology is definitely a part of the practical application of sustainability. Technology allows us really to make processes more sustainable, so that our individual actions can have a larger impact, so that we're not, like Meg mentioned, trying to have small sustainable efforts attempting to hold up just an inherently unsustainable system. And a really key example of this is the LED light bulb. Over the past decade or so, these light bulbs have really been evolving to become more sustainable and more energy efficient. We've gone from fluorescents to CFLs to LEDs in the last couple of years. Some of you might even remember changing them out or changing them out to CFLs and remembering how that was the new sort of technology for this. And because of their innovation, LED light bulbs have sort of become the forefront of the energy conservation movement. And it really allows you to reduce the amount of energy you're using when you have to use lights and you have to do such things, because that's how our society works. There's also, as Meg mentioned, the fossil fuels that are feeding those light bulbs. So that's where technology comes in. And I want to give a few more examples of technology. So if we could switch to the next slide. So sustainable technology is pretty common, and it's actually really usable in our everyday lives. Whether that's renewable energies or rooftop solar, you can have energy efficient appliances like LEDs or energy stars, or smart meters, even electrical vehicle transport, whether it's public transport or your personal car, it reduces your fossil fuel use. And on a bigger community scale, wastewater treatments allow us to use water repeatedly, and have sprung the rise of purple pipes around cities. And recycling plants, when they become more high tech, means that all that time you spend figuring out how to recycle something or wash it out, and then actually putting it in recycling, it'll actually, having high tech plants allows us to actually recycle that and make it into something usable again. And as Meg mentioned, there's a lot of reasons to get involved in sustainability. And there's a lot of reasons to do so and a lot of ways to do so. And technology is definitely a part of that through these examples and a lot more. However, even for people who have really made that very clear and deliberate decision to become more sustainable, sustainability, especially green or sustainable technology, isn't always accessible. And we're going to go ahead and switch to the next slide to see some examples of this. Sorry. Okay. So the first example I'd like to touch on is solar energy. So hopefully most of us know rooftop solar is a great way to reduce the carbon emissions of your home. It reduces our reliance on the grid system and reduces our total fossil fuel use. And solar can also have savings on the energy bill, which is a huge benefit for low-income homes. Solar panels also allow us to reduce local pollution, which can have a very big and positive impact on minority communities, which are often some of the most burdened communities for pollutants. However, even with the income and home ownership status accounted for, rooftop solars are more popular among, rooftop solars, Black and Hispanic communities have significantly less rooftop solar installations than white or Asian communities. And this contributes to uneven distribution of both the physical technology of green energy, but also the uneven distribution of environmental and financial benefits that solar panels can provide. And we'll go ahead and talk about another example in the next slide, Gabby. So another example is really often in the news now with companies like Tesla. Electric vehicles are super important for reducing our carbon footprint, especially when we're walking or we're biking or using public transport isn't necessarily available, which is true for a lot of minority or low-income communities. And just like solar panels, electric vehicles have a financial benefit of much lower maintenance and running costs, which allows for financial savings as well as sustainable ones. But like Meg mentioned, even as they grow in popularity and use, electric vehicles are just expensive upright. I'm sure we've all seen this. Two quick examples of that is the BMW i3 is twice as expensive as other small sedans, and the Ford Focus electric version is 1.5 times the cost of its gas-powered equivalent. And this really creates a barrier for people who don't have a lot of disposable income that they can put towards the car. Along with the expensive costs, there's limited access to charging infrastructure at the moment, and the available infrastructure tends to be in higher income communities. However, with states pushing for increased use of electric vehicles and the future ban of gas-powered ones, rebates and tax credits are being offered, which really have the potential to reduce the financial barriers to them. But up to 90% of those credits actually go to the very top of the eligible income groups. So all these things are limiting accessibility to EVs, which also means that they're limiting the number of green cars that we have on our roads and on our streets and reducing pollution and reducing our fossil fuel use. So these are just two examples from some really innovative technologies that are pretty modern that people can actually use in their everyday lives. But as we've seen here, they're not always accessible. And actually, we do have some studies mentioned, and Gabby can go ahead and put in the slides just a couple of some links to things if you're wanting to look a bit further into those studies that I mentioned. But as I was saying, these technologies aren't always accessible. You might be asking, well, why is this important to sustainability? Surely if more people are sustainable, those benefits can extend to the entire community. But policies like California's cap and trade prove that that's not true. With reduced total state greenhouse gas emissions, but companies buying credits that allow them to pollute more with with most of that burden falling on minority or low-income communities. So equity is a very important to the success of sustainability. But let's take it one step further, and we'll be switching to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a short definition of environmental justice. Can I have an audience member unmute themselves and read the sentence?
I can read it. The fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies.
Thank you so much for reading that out for us, Nikki. What I really want to focus on tonight, though, is that bolded and green phrase, meaningful involvement. Meg went over the reasons that sustainability is so important. It allows you to live in alignment with your values and manage your impact on the environment. But this unequal access to green technology is unequal access to something that has very direct consequences for someone's environment. And that unequal access is limiting a person's meaningful involvement. So this unequal access to green and sustainable technology is most certainly an environmental justice issue. And we'll see on the next slide that technology is important and vital to today's society. We all know that. We're all here on our laptops, learning through Zoom at the moment. It's super important, and amazing innovations in technology are happening every day. But those technologies, like Meg mentioned, are definitely subject to the inequalities in society, like everything else. And when the tech industry or anyone promoting these new technologies have a disconnect from the social implications of their work, this really innovative and groundbreaking technology falls to the same processes that lead to other environmental justice issues. And just a few of the big challenges to equal access to technology. Financial barriers, like we mentioned, for the solar panels and EVs, they're really expensive upfront, and they have limited support to make them more accessible. There's also a lack of education and training in the sense of awareness of these tech, and also availability of training so that people can have jobs that go with this technology, like a wind turbine engineer. We also have infrastructure limits. Some products are only available some places at the moment, and those tend to be in richer cities with a lot of people. And sometimes not all the necessary supporting technology is available. But all these challenges connect with and interact with each other, and all of them are equally important in overcoming that barrier to equal access. Now, I'd like to pause here. We've covered technology and sustainability, that relationship, as well as how that connects to environmental justice. Do we have any questions or concerns? First, I'll go over to Gabby. Do we have anything in the chat or raised hands? No? All right. If anyone would like to unmute themselves to ask a question or make a comment, please feel free to. Okay, no questions. Great. With that, I'd like to go ahead and move on to our next slide. This will be our first discussion. So we'll have 8 minutes in a breakout room with one of the facilitators. And when we reconvene, we'll ask one person from each group, whether that's a facilitator or just a member of the audience, to share some key points from their discussion. Like Gabby mentioned at the beginning, please remember that this should be a community space that's safe for people to reflect on these issues as well as learn about them through discussion. So the first, our first discussion will be focused on personal reflection. And if one of the facilitators could copy these questions and put them in the chat, I'd appreciate that. And I'll go ahead and really quickly create some breakout rooms. Okay, awesome. All the questions are in the chat now, so when I put you into breakout rooms, we should be able to see them no problem. I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms, and it'll be, we'll have 8 minutes with that. All right, see you all in 8 minutes. I think that is everyone back now. Okay, would Gabby or someone else from room 1 like to share some of the points that you discussed?
I can represent my group really briefly. So myself, Emma, Jess, and Sharon, we talked about like how multifaceted this issue is and how this ultimately dives into like things about equity like all across the globe in different nation states, so on and so forth. I think Jess also made a really good point about this like one data science class having to do with like data ethics and how there is technology, but behind it are humans running the entire operation. So to maintain that like cognition and that self-awareness of how technology isn't an autonomous type of thing, and that there are people who create it and code it in specific ways, and there are social implications of that. It was super interesting to talk about.
That's great. Would anyone else from that group like to share something? If not, can someone from room 2 with Meg go ahead and share what you discussed?
Yes, so in breakout room 2, we talked a lot about like the accessibility of sustainability and how like eventually like the climate crisis and like not being sustainable like affects everyone, including marginalized communities. So it's important that like like we talked about the importance of the sustainability movement being inclusive of everyone. And also like in terms of our own abilities to practice sustainability, we talked about like difficulties with being a college, like a university student, especially because we're on tight budgets, and like the kind of ethical challenges, because like, for example, we talked about fast fashion and how like if you're looking for something new, like fast fashion is like not the most sustainable option, but we're put in the position of like looking into it more because of being on a tight budget, because of being like, because of our identities as college students. So how it's kind of just difficult because of like the system and not necessarily our own faults. Yeah, it's a good discussion.
Excellent. I'm glad you were able to bring up some of those points. Would anyone from my room like to share? If not, we can go ahead and I can go ahead and share, but all right. So a couple of things that we touched on was a couple of things that we touched on were about the sustainability movement and how there's sometimes a little bit of shaming or feeling bad when maybe your lifestyles or your family or your finance don't necessarily allow you to be fully sustainable, and how that's important to remember if you are someone who can be sustainable really easily. And then for the last question, it was an over resounding no, that sustainability and green tech need to be accessible and they need to be equal if they're ever going to be considered successful. So I'm glad we were able to have some of those discussions. We're now going to go ahead and move on to a couple of points on the next slide before we move into our last discussion. All right. So I really want to just touch on briefly about how this connects back to the general sustainability movement. Sustainability can and should directly address these inequalities as part of their movement, our movement, sorry. And there's a benefit to the movement as well. By being more inclusive, less people will be disillusioned by our movement, more people will be involved, and that's strength to the movement. And with that comes more power to impact more positive change and continue bringing these benefits to more people, which repeats that cycle. And there are two sort of goals to address this. The more immediate one is that anyone with the initiative to be more sustainable should be able to, without any sort of unjust challenges. If you want solar panels on your roof to reduce your carbon footprint, the huge upfront cost of them shouldn't be an issue. And then a more long-term goal is that sustainability will hopefully one day be an inherent part of society and our lives, so that people don't have to make that choice and try to exist sustainably in an unsustainable world. With that, I'd like to go ahead and move on to a couple of positive points so that we end on an optimistic view. I do want to take a moment to highlight just some of these people and organizations and achievements that have been working to limit inequalities and being able to live sustainability and continue to, despite the events of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. So to start off, you and everyone that you share this with, moving forward, whether or not you were aware of some of these issues before, now you are, and you can be conscious and deliberate in your choices about addressing them. There are a couple of student groups on campus like Serc, the Students of Color Environmental Collective, and Berkeley Student Farms that also further this movement. There's also a local nonprofit that several of us have been lucky enough to work with about access to technology and the necessary training and jobs that go along with that. And even though individual actions have huge impacts, sometimes it's nice to also be aware of some larger scale achievements and process with these issues. For example, the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, just their existence really acknowledge the importance of sustainability and equal rights in the development of countries. The State Bill 100 is California's first law that explicitly connects environmental justice with climate change and climate actions and mandates supporting environmental justice as we move forward. And there's also a potential with the Biden and Harris an administration and their commitment to environmental justice and that focus in their climate action. With that, we're going to have another discussion that we'll paste in the chat again about sort of the visions and solutions. Awesome, Meg's put them in the chat. We are running a little bit short on time, so this will only be 6 minutes, but it will be the same groups and we can share when we get back. And we do have a surprise at the end, so if you're able to, please stick around till 7 o'clock. With that, I'll go ahead and put everyone into the same breakout rooms again. Okay, we have a couple of people still in rooms, but we are at the very end, so thank you so much for staying with us. We're going to launch one quick poll, another poll. All right, everyone's back. We don't have time to share all the groups, unfortunately, but if anyone they said something connected really strongly with them, please feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat to share with the entire group. Well, if no one likes to share, hopefully it was very productive for you and this has been meaningful. Please go ahead and fill out this poll really quickly. And I think it's very similar to the poll we had at the beginning, but just a slight change. And I think what we see before and at the end is that as a community, we do associate technology with sustainability. It seems to shift that there are a few more people for who they very strongly associate it now, which has shifted a bit. And then we're all aware of potential inequalities, which is great. And then our last thing, if we could go to our last slide, Gabby, and if we could put something in the chat, we would really appreciate all your feedback on this event. So if we fill out this Google form that's going to be in the chat, you'll be entered into a raffle for a few online gift cards from a selection of local stores as well as online ones if you're not in the Bay Area. Do we have the link for that somewhere?
Yeah, I'll put it in right now.
Okay, sorry. But yeah, so raffle prizes, and we'll also be sharing this recording and some more resources, and we'll also be sharing that feedback survey. So thank everyone so much for coming. Hopefully this was productive for you and you'll be able to continue these conversations and continue to be mindful of that. But there you go, there is the raffle. Please try to fill it out sometime this week, I think. But thank you for